Hey, it's Mike Lipowski. Another component that contributes to our overall training demands is volume. Now, we all know that volume is the amount of exercise performed in a workout. And we also know that a certain amount of exercise is necessary in order to stimulate gains. However, what we all want to know is how much do we need? And in order to answer that question, we just need to understand some basic fundamentals regarding training volume. That being, it's the total number of sets performed, the repetitions, and the time under tension. Now, you need to mind all three, because failing to do so is where a lot of the confusion and the arguments regarding this topic stem from. Many people, they only consider the number of sets performed when declaring something as being either high volume or low volume. Or they may only look at the length of the workout and use that as their measuring stick. But either of those only gives us a very microscopic view of what's going on. It doesn't take a look at the big picture. And the same goes for only counting repetitions. It's only a little piece of the story, which is why something like time under tension probably deserves a little more respect and attention than it gets. Now, how much volume that we need is really dependent upon two factors: muscle fiber type and goals. Now, our muscle fiber types probably play the largest role in determining how much volume is necessary, but most people don't understand the topic enough to take it from that point of view, which is something that we're going to try to do as we move forward. Now, I'm going to assume for a moment that you already understand the basic characteristics of the various muscle fiber types. You know the difference between slow twitch muscle fibers and fast twitch and intermediate or mixed. If you don't, the best thing that you could do is to pause this right now. Take the next 60 minutes and go study up on those muscle fiber types and understand the general characteristics of each. Because if you don't, then anything we talk about from this point forward isn't going to make much sense. So with that being said, we have all these muscle fiber types distributed throughout our entire body. But it's the percent of distribution within each muscle group that determines our strength, endurance, and hypertrophy capabilities. And when we have a sense of which end of the spectrum a certain muscle group leans towards, it provides us with clues as to the direction that we should be going with our volume, and even with our training frequency as well. One of the things that we need to focus on is rate of fatigue. Since you and I are working in a gym, we're not working out of a lab, it'd be very difficult to know exactly what our percentage of distribution is. I mean, we're never going to know it precisely. But as I said, our training and our development definitely leaves us some great clues. So for example, if you have a number of years of training experience under your belt and a good amount of development, you may have noticed that there's certain muscle groups that are just super responsive to anything that you do. I mean, you could literally look at the weight and your muscles start blowing up. But consequently, on the opposite end of the spectrum, there's certain muscle groups that seem to be stubborn, or you're a hard gainer. And those muscle groups, well, it's very likely that those are the ones that have a large degree of slow twitch muscle fibers. And again, the ones that are very responsive tend to lean more towards the fast twitch end of the spectrum. So rate of fatigue is how long a muscle can last or how quickly it recovers. So a few ways we could test this is if we took 80% of your 1 rep max for a single joint movement, and this has to be done with a single joint movement because we do not want other muscle groups contributing to the exercise because that's going to skew our result. So let's take an exercise like the leg extension, for example. If you were to test your 1 rep max for the leg extension, and that's without using a lot of extraneous movements or tensing up your entire body, just purely what your quads could handle. If you took 80% of that and did a set to the point of momentary muscular failure, how long does it take you to reach that point of failure? That's what we would consider time under tension. So if you, let's say, perform that set with 80% of your 1 rep max and you failed after 30 seconds, it may tell you that you lean closer to the fast twitch end of the spectrum, or that muscle group does. If, with that same 80%, you were able to do the set for, let's say, 60 seconds, it may say that you lean a little bit more in the intermediate side of the equation. If you were able to perform that set for, let's say, upwards of 90 seconds, well, it's pretty safe to assume that you have a large degree of slow twitch muscle fibers. Now, that's one way of testing it. And obviously, it's not perfect, but like I said, it provides us with clues, and that's all we're looking for. The other way that we could test this is still using single joint movements only. We choose a weight that we're going to reach muscular failure with in approximately 60 seconds. And after we reach failure, we're going to rest for 60 to 90 seconds. And then we're going to go and perform that same exercise again with the same weight. Now, the percent difference in time under tension from the first set compared to the second is going to give us a good sense, once again, of which end of the spectrum we may lean towards. So, for example, if in the second set you reached failure in 50% or less, or more, I should say, of that time under tension, then you probably lean closer to the fast twitch end of the spectrum. If you're matching or maybe even exceeding what you did, then you're definitely on the slow twitch end. And then, of course, anything in between that would be more in the mixed or intermediate type. But again, you could be leaning a little bit more towards slow twitch or fast twitch, all depending upon what that time under tension is. So that's one way. That just leaves us with some clues. And, as you know, because of the characteristics of each muscle fiber type, a fast twitch muscle fiber, if it's trained to the point of muscular failure, then it's going to take a lot longer for that muscle fiber to recover compared to a slow twitch one. So that's why using this comparison in time under tension from one set to the next is a pretty good way of getting an idea of what end of the spectrum we lie on. So one thing that we know is that slow twitch muscle fibers, they tend to respond better to longer times under tension. So typically sets that may last anywhere in the range of 60 to 90 seconds. And I think this is where a lot of the old suggestion for women to do a lot of repetitions came from. It's that people sort of understood without really understanding that women do tend to have more slow twitch muscle fibers compared to men and are better built for endurance. And so the longer set times tends to fatigue more of those muscles that they can have an impact on. Since they have fewer fast twitch muscle fibers, it's still important that they train them, but more of their development is going to come by working those slow twitch and intermediate muscle fibers. So with that being said, the number of sets or time under tension for a slow twitch muscle fiber is going to be, again, on the higher end. You're going to have longer time under tensions, and that muscle is going to be able to tolerate a greater volume. For our fast twitch muscle fibers, those are going to probably respond better to sets that are more in the 30 to 45 second range. And our mixed intermediate, as you would imagine, somewhere in that 45 to probably 60, maybe even 70 second range. And then as far as the number of sets are concerned, because fast twitch muscle fibers are more easily fatigable and take longer to recover, we'll probably want a slightly lower volume compared to the other two. Next, we have to consider what is the goal, what is the objective that we're after. See, because this is also where, even though we may have a specific muscle fiber type that tells us the ideal way to train is this way, our goals may indicate that we need to train in a different way and take things in a different direction. So, using an example of somebody who has more intermediate or slow twitch muscle fibers, what if they wanted to compete in powerlifting? How would they need to train? Well, we know the way powerlifters need to train, and that person would need to train that way too. However, that wouldn't necessarily be ideal for maximizing that person's muscular hypertrophy or their general strength. But the way that they need to train in order to be successful in their sport requires shorter time under tension, fewer reps, maybe more sets, but with longer rest periods in between. So even though it might not be ideal for training the particular makeup of a muscle group, it's just what they have to do for that sport, for that activity. Same goes for somebody who has a lot of fast twitch muscle fibers. They may be interested in endurance activities. And because of that, because they want to maximize their muscular endurance, it's best that they train with higher time under tensions and maybe a little bit more volume and scaling back on the intensity. So as we see, what might be ideal for a muscle fiber type might not necessarily be ideal for our goals or the activities that we're training for. In terms of maximizing muscular hypertrophy and general strength, that's when you do want to train as closely to your muscle fiber makeup as you possibly can. So, as we mentioned before, all of this, it's taking a look at that big picture and understanding everything that's going on and why there's no ideal way of training, or there's definitely no ideal amount of volume that people need to train with. As mentioned earlier, the total number of sets doesn't tell us the whole story. And the reason why goes back to time under tension. So you have some people who may perform only one set, but they perform that set all out for 45 seconds. And somebody who does 3 sets may say, well, that's a low volume guy. But yet, the person who's doing 3 sets may only do each for approximately 15 seconds. And maybe it's because they perform their repetitions faster, or because they're pyramiding their way up. But regardless, the 3 sets, the amount of time under tension adds up to exactly the same thing the guy who was doing 1 set was working for, same amount of time. So you can't judge things simply by the number of sets. We need to look at time under tension, and more importantly, we need to look at the total amount of effort or the total amount of demands that are being placed upon a muscle. So I like to refer to this as max effort time. So if we take a look at the person who's doing 3 or 4 sets for a particular exercise, well, they may only really train their hardest during that last set. And so the amount of stimulation could be the same as somebody who's doing half the number of sets, but maybe slightly longer time under tension, or maybe they're just putting forth greater effort into the sets that they do perform. And so, who's right? Well, again, it depends upon the needs, it depends upon the goals. But the point is that we can't dictate what's high volume and low volume simply by a number of sets. And even to go back to the length of a workout, if somebody requires a little bit more rest between exercises because they're trying to maximize their strength gains for those particular exercises, well, just because their workout gets stretched from 30 minutes to 45 minutes doesn't mean they've suddenly become, a high volume training. And just because somebody decides that they want to pack more in, as Charles Staley likes to call it, density training, pack more into less time, but they're working with a high degree of effort and still performing a large volume of exercise, it doesn't mean that suddenly they're a low volume person. So the key here is to simply understand what your particular needs are, understand what your goals are, and then figure out what's going to be the appropriate volume based on that. And the other things that we need to consider is, what's the quality of your repetition performance? What's the intensity of your performance? All of these are cumulative factors that determine how much we need to be doing.